Well, this is Dave Gaddis, and today is March 10th, 2015, and we're interviewing Wendall Davis here in his office in San Antonio, so I'd like to welcome you here.
Thanks, Dave.
So why don't we start at the beginning and tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in Cushing, Oklahoma,
Okay,
the pipeline crossroads of the world.
okay, and why were your parents in Cushing, Oklahoma?
I don't know. I was too young to ask.
Okay,
But my dad was a barber and my mother was just a housekeeper. They had 8 kids and I was the youngest.
okay. Did you stay in Oklahoma your entire childhood?
Yes, I did. I lived in Cushing till I was 12.
Okay, and then where did you go from there?
Moved to Bethany, Oklahoma, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City.
Okay, and that where you graduated from high school?
If I had graduated, that would have been it.
Okay.
I was still a half a credit shy, but since I was enrolled at Bethany Nazarene College, I was accepted there, and I kept going.
Okay, and
No sweat.
and what did you study at Bethany Nazarene?
At Bethany, I was like pre-architecture. I took a lot of drafting, a lot of geometry. I was an intern with an architect, and he was a professor there at Bethany, and I helped him with some of his drawing classes.
Okay, what got you interested in architecture?
I'm not sure, but in the 4th grade, I was interested in architecture, and I did a drawing of the public library there in Cushing, a little chalk drawing.
Okay, and did you end up with a degree in?
Not in architecture.
Okay, what was your
No.
degree in?
Well, I went from Bethany, I went to Oklahoma State,
Okay.
and I did major in architecture. It was pre-engineering at Bethany, architecture in at Oklahoma State, and then I got drafted. So I spent 2 years, I went to Dallas. I needed money, so I had to have a job, so I worked for an architect as a draftsman in Dallas.
Do you remember what the name of the architecture firm was?
Yes, I do. Fred Buford and Associates.
Okay, are they still around, or do you know?
I don't think so. Fred Buford was a pretty old feller back then in the 60s.
Okay,
So then I got drafted.
Okay.
No, actually I went to work for another architect, Surf Ross and Associates, and that's when I was drafted.
okay. What branch of the service did you go into?
Army.
Okay, and where were you posted in the Army?
Basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and the rest of my 2 years was in Mineral Wells, Fort Walters, Mineral Wells, Texas.
Okay, and what did you do?
Well, I was a draftsman,
Okay,
but they had about 5 draftsmen that didn't have anything to do. So when the battalion photographer got out of the Army, they asked for volunteers to become the battalion photographer. And I volunteered, and he trained me, and so I ended up with my own Jeep, my own office darkroom, a .45 pistol, and lots of freedom.
okay.
It was a good thing to do.
Sounds like it. Did you stay at Fort Walters, or did you ever?
For Fort Walters, just for the rest of that.
Did you have an overseas deployment at all?
No, never did.
Okay, so you got out, and what did you go back into architecture?
Let's see, yes, I did. I went back to Oklahoma State, and I think I only lasted 1 semester. Then I went back to Dallas and worked. Maybe that's when I worked for Fred Buford. But anyway, I started, when I went back to Dallas after Oklahoma State, I went to UT Arlington.
Okay.
I had already decided back in '68 I was going to become, I was planning on being an architect still, and I went to a planning conference at UTA. And that's when I decided I was going to switch to planning.
Okay.
And so I looked at my transcripts and to figure what was the shortest way to get my bachelor's degree. It wasn't going to be in architecture. I could do either sociology or economics. So I went into economics because I had to take 3 hours less to get my degree.
Okay.
So in 1970 I graduated UTA in economics.
And then did you go straight to graduate school?
I went to graduate school at the University of Rhode Island.
Okay. How did you end up at Rhode Island?
I applied to about a half a dozen schools around the country, and Rhode Island at the time was the planning school for New England. And it was a 2-year, 60 credit program in Kingston, Rhode Island. And so, well, we moved with our 2-year-old to Rhode Island for a couple years.
Do you remember any of the professors in the Rhode Island program?
Yes. Arnold Nadler, who I saw, he taught research methodology. I saw him at the Boston conference. He lives in Salem, or did at the time. So I saw him, and then there was Howard Foster, who's probably still there somewhere, but I don't think he's at the university. I'm pretty sure he's not. And then Arthur Jeffrey, and let's see, I did a graduate internship with a lawyer. I can't even think of his name now, but Newtown's Research.
Okay. Any other your classmates that you remember or keep in touch with?
Yes, actually, I had to rack my brain though to think of their names, and got a few that I'm friends with on Facebook.
Okay.
So not very many.
So you have a master's degree in city planning. Where to then?
Master of Community Planning and Area Development. Well, in '72, I went to the national conference in Detroit.
Okay.
They actually had a decent conference back there in Cobo Hall. So I interviewed with a few people, and I was hired to go to Tulsa and as the Chief of Development Economics Research and Data. I don't know how I got that job, but it was sort of like long-range planning. But anyway, I went there in '72 and stayed till '70. Well, I stayed it was at the Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, and I developed population and economic projections for the planning effort there.
Okay.
Neighborhood plan, did one neighborhood plan for a real large neighborhood. And before I left Tulsa, I went to work for Frank Osgood for 1 year as a consultant.
Okay. While you were at Tulsa, were there any other staff people that you worked with that you recall?
Well, Don Osgood, who was the planning director, Jim Biffle was the assistant director back then. Can't think of very many of them.
Okay.
It's a long time ago.
Well, and so tell me what you did with Frank Osgood.
Well, he did private consulting on real estate markets, office, land, office market, land market. I don't think he did any housing, but did some retail studies, and did a study for the Arkansas River corridor.
Okay. And where was his office at the time? Where was he located?
In Tulsa.
In Tulsa.
Uh-huh.
And,
It was his brother who was the planning director.
okay. I was going to ask if there was a
Yes,
relationship.
yeah, there was.
So after you worked for Frank, where did you go?
Well, I came to Texas in '77 to a spring Texas APA conference.
Okay.
And I'd submitted my application for Chief of Long Range Planning in San Antonio.
Okay. Is this with the city or the council?
The city.
Okay.
The city. And I was selected, and I moved down here in '77,
Okay.
summer.
How long were you with the city?
Well, just a little over 2 years. I got fired, and then
Sounds like there may be a story behind that.
there is. I don't know if I'll mention names because somebody you really know. One of your favorite people, I'm sure. One of your opponents at one time. And a few months later, he was also fired.
Okay.
So then I became a consultant.
Okay. And what did you do as a consultant?
Well, the interesting one interesting thing was I did some had some marketing advice from some marketing consultants to market yourself. So I kind of picked up on about a half a dozen, no, let's see. I requested interviews with about 50 prominent individuals in San Antonio that I thought I wanted to work for. But actually, the idea was that you get advice interviews. And from each one of those, you're supposed to get references. And you're supposed to let them know at the very beginning that you're not expecting them to have a job for you or to know of one. So that relaxes them. They get involved. Then they'll read your resume. And they were very helpful. A lot of good protocol in that method. So I ended up, nobody had a job for me, but I did end up working for a developer, a residential developer, Lloyd Denton Development back then, and he had like 20 companies. So he had me to be his planner on basically an hourly rate for any company that he needed to have plans done for. So I did that for a few years until, well, he died in '84. I continued to work with the family until '88 when kind of the bottom fell out. And all that time I was trying to do real estate market research and just about anything else that would come along. So the planning kind of dried up in the late '80s.
Okay. And so in '88, what did you end up doing?
I still struggled, but I stayed. I formed a corporation in '83 to do real estate market research, and on the side I still had Wendall Davis and Associates in the background. So, I did planning and research with essay research, and so it was pretty slow till about '91 or so, and I started doing some more land planning for a residential developer.
Okay. And as part of the land planning, you would actually lay out subdivisions?
I did it the hard way.
Represent the company before city planning commissions?
I did that, yes.
So.
I did all kinds of things. Doing what I was doing, I would do market study. I did like a major market study for a big municipal utility district, and also did land plans for that same utility district. I did lots of residential land plans, and a lot of it was just sketches and preliminaries that never came to fruition for the same client, most of the same clients. And but in the '90s, I did more land plans, and Lance and I started an industry magazine for new home builders, and it was just a list. It was like a listing of any builder's new homes that he wanted to put on the market. So we did that for like 25 years.
Yeah. And it's no longer in publication?
It died in 2006 or 7 because of the market, no housing market.
Okay.
And builders, most of the builders went to their own websites, and we tried to go to online, but it didn't. Our hearts weren't in that, so we stopped. Okay. But I always did my land planning. I did it with parallel bar and triangles and
I was going to ask.
Manually.
You started out with.
That's the way I started. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I didn't know how to use.
Young planners are so used to using CAD.
Oh yeah, AutoCAD and GIS. Actually, in '86, I got sort of a break, but to do demographics and school projections for Northeast Independent School District, and so that, and then all through the '90s and most of the 2000s, I did the demographics and school projection, and I was able to use ArcView 3.2, but then when they went upgraded to or 8.1, I fell out of the ball game there. And but I've always had, ever since then, I've had people to work for me that did that.
Okay. And so what kinds of things are you doing now?
Well, it's been really slow. So, and since about 2007, I've done a lot of demographics with with an architectural programming firm.
Okay.
For campus master plans, for community colleges, for school districts. All through the 90s, we did school districts in San Antonio and Houston and the Dallas area, and even did something in East Texas. And but then that's the K-12 school districts, and then I've done some demographics, which is pretty helpful in your if you've got a horizon year for your plan, your master plan. This is what I was doing for this facility programming and consulting. I'm still doing that occasionally for them. Okay. Because they still, get little campus work.
Well, you mentioned several times that you attended some planning conferences. When did you first get involved in APA or its predecessors, AIP or ASPO?
Well, I was in ASPO in University of Rhode Island. Okay. In the early 70s. And then when it became APA,
did one of your professors talk you into doing that, or did you just start?
It was kind of acceptable. I mean, it was kind of expected, really, of the students to be student members of ASPO and APA. I can't remember what year it was that it became APA. Do you?
1978.
Okay, so I was ASPO till 78.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you get involved with maybe section officer or?
Not in Tulsa, okay. And probably not in San Antonio. Yeah, a little bit in San Antonio in the late 70s, and then more in the 80s. Okay. Some in the 90s. I finally felt like I was too old in the 90s to be on the executive committee, so we recruited some younger planners and got them elected.
Okay. Were you ever section director? Or?
Oh yeah, okay. More than once. I don't recall the years, but section director. That's as high as I ever went.
Okay, I was going to ask if you went on to the chapter or anything else. Well, let's see, just skimming through if there's anything that you did take the AICP? I
took it in 1980.
Okay, and that was a written exam at that time? Or?
I kind of think it was, although my number is 2,489, I believe.
Okay, I think that was about the time that went to a written exam.
The really fortunate thing was that I think it was at that time designed for somebody that had their master's degree in planning and a certain number of years of experience. Mm-hmm. So I said, I'm just going to test that theory. I'm not studying. So I did take it without studying. I don't think I could ever do it again without studying. It'd take a lot. But yeah, I did that without studying in 1980, and it worked out just fine.
You're one of the first people that we've interviewed that's actually been involved in the private development side.
Really?
And so how would you rate that as an experience for a young planner who might be coming out of school?
There's all kinds of aspects to the private sector. There's small firms, Mine was pretty much a solo practice. I had some employees, but that's a good way to go into debt. So I don't recommend that. And you really have to charge high fees to make it go, and it's pretty hard to make ends meet that way. It worked okay, but it was never that lucrative. But I think in the private sector, the lucrative jobs are with big firms who get very lucrative contracts. And I'm talking right now about the military contracts for those big firms. And any others too that can swing it. I'd say those are lucrative.
If you had to give advice to a young planner coming out of school, what might it be?
I'd say try both. I liked working for myself all these years because it gave me so much flexibility, and since I loved what I was doing, I could, we could make it without being rich and enjoy it. I still enjoy it. So even though it's been really slow in the past few years, but I've had a good career that's been very rewarding.
There's often been a lot of criticism that planners don't understand enough about the private market as they should. Do you have any observations in that regard?
That's really why they should do both. Try for a few years. I mean, but of course you can get entrenched, but I think that's not good for you to get entrenched in the public sector. What do you think? Anyway, that's my feeling, and I think it's a unique opportunity, and sometimes you are fortunate. The planning in San Antonio. I came here to basically to do practically a new master plan, comprehensive plan, and we had all the chapters written. We had all the tools, the growth controls, but then politics thwarted that, and it wasn't that my boss wasn't in favor of that too, but it takes a lot of tact and a lot of good politicking to get the plan adopted, which that didn't happen. So then all through the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, San Antonio hasn't had too much of a master plan. In the 80s, we did get one that was created that was mostly a policy plan. And then we had a lot of people that were opposed to a map, a land use map. And I don't know if they've ever really adopted a land use map. But there's been elements of the comprehensive plan that have been adopted over the years. And but now I think, with John Dugan's effort and his support that he's gotten from the city manager, he's probably got the best chance since the 60s of having a comprehensive plan adopted. And it's still going to be another 18 months at least.
It's interesting. San Antonio has had a couple of mayors with planning training. But the politics are just too volatile here? Well,
the day-to-day, if you're the mayor, you don't get into planning. Your day-to-day stuff eats you alive. So, they had good intentions. Actually, we did. We had Howard Peak was a planner. Ed Garza was a planner. Henry Cisneros was a planner. But they tried to do what they could do. But usually they were looking at the big picture. And so it rarely involved a comprehensive plan.
Well, you've probably some mentors in your career. You've talked about the professor at Rhode Island. Have there been other mentors that have helped guide your career over the years?
Here in town?
Or anywhere?
Well, Frank Osgood was a mentor. In Tulsa, let's see. In Tulsa, I think Frank and his brother Don were mentors. In San Antonio, I had to answer a lot of questions rather than get to ask them. So you can't be mentored if you're the one that's answering the questions. So then when I went to work for Mr. Denton, he was a mentor in land development. His son, Lloyd Denton Jr., known as Laddie, he was a mentor too because he was a different generation developer from what his dad was, and I'm not sure what his degree was in. It's probably business. His dad's degree was in accounting. So I learned a lot from him. I learned from a lot of builders that I did work for and a lot of developers I did work for. I've done land development packages for developers for huge residential developments, and those are always a learning experience. And you get to know the developer pretty intimately because you got to learn how they do business. And so that way then you can convey that information in your report. But you have every aspect of their land development business is going in that report because you're trying to get an investor's package.
So the flip side of the mentors is, are there any proteges or people that you've mentored that you're particularly proud of?
Well, every employee I ever have is a person that I try to help them to grow and to rise in whatever field that they want to be in. And so I've always had a pleasant surrounding for any employees. They haven't ever been that rewarded, you know, as I told you before. But I think I rarely had a disgruntled employee. I had one that I had a chance to mentor, but he wasn't mentee material.
Okay, I didn't know that
He
was
didn't,
going on.
you know what I mean?
Okay.
Anyway, that didn't work out that the way I'd liked for it to have, but he's on his own now.
Okay. You've alluded several times to working on some large residential projects. Are there any of those that you're particularly proud of that you were involved with?
Yes, I was involved with Encino Park.
Okay.
In fact, I did that market study for the mud actually there were 4 muds for Encino Park. It was 2,300 acres originally. So they created 4 different municipal utility districts. I had a lot to do with Oakwell Farms, although it was started by Ford, Powell, and Carson. I did some fairly interesting planning and some detailed plans for it. I've done tiny, 1 acre and 2 acre residential plans for Denton, and just about all sizes, 4,000 acres, 5,000 acres. I did a study in San Marcos for savings and loan. Basically, they needed a land use study for an appraisal. So, and it was, it was on the aquifer up in Hayes County. So, and then I did one in just outside of San Marcos, which was another mud, and it was 500 acres. It never got very far, but it does have like a few tenants right now, but it does have utilities. So there. I've done all kinds of economic studies, affordable housing. For a while, one of my niches was affordable housing. So I've done a lot of studies related to that, market studies, and land plans for that kind of subdivisions.
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about your professional career. Are there things that you like to do while you're not working?
Yes.
Nonprofit work, hobbies?
In 2007, Frank Osgood and I formed the Regional Planning Foundation.
Okay.
And of course, he has a book that he was hoping that sales of that book would help to fund the foundation, but hasn't been as lucrative or as successful as we'd hoped. I've been on a nonprofit, the board, since '99. I was on the Neighborhood Resource Center board of directors. I left it last fall. And I sing in the church choir.
Okay.
And that's a lot of fun.
Okay.
Been doing that for I don't know how long now. Maybe 25 years.
Okay.
But like to go on cruises. My wife and I have gone on 6 or 8 cruises, and been to Alaska twice. I recommend an Alaskan cruise and tour. You want to take the land tour too. That's very pleasant.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, how did you and your wife meet?
When I was in Fort Walters,
Okay.
I picked her up at a Dairy Queen.
Okay. So
Me and a buddy of mine in my old, I had a Fiat 600D. It looks like the current Fiats, the little ones. I had a Fiat, and we were at the Dairy Queen, and my wife and her girlfriend were there, and I was with my buddy, and so we spent some time with them, and I kept going by.
So she's a native of Mineral Wells?
She's from Weatherford, which is 20 miles
Okay.
east. You know where that is?
Right.
Where Craig Farmer is, right?
That's right. Well, we've talked a lot about a lot of things. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
No, I guess not.
It sounds like we've covered everything.
We've covered, yeah, that's in a nutshell right there.
Okay, so with that, I want to thank you for spending some time with us.
My pleasure.